This is Fam Electric Ghost. We're live on the air for the first time with Allison Graham. And thank you for being on the program. Tonight, we're going to talk about the stress illusion. And this is the topic that we're going to get into, the stress illusion, defy the lies that keep you stressed. And this is episode 935 of the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. We've been on the air since 2016. That's tracking on Apple Podcast. And again, thank you for being on the show. We do want to mention one thing before we fully start is we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You can see that up there, that link. And so if you use coupon code GHOST, you receive 1 month free premium subscription. We will be on Newsly later tonight as an audio version of the podcast. But then again, here we go with the stress illusion, defy the lies that keep you stressed. We maybe want to start with that topic, or talk about your background first before we get into that, and then you have the floor.
All right, I'm in. This is exciting. 900 and how many? 35 episodes.
36.
36. That's incredible. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I got a lot of shoes to fill here. In here. All right. So do you want me to give the background? Oh, I thought you were going to give it. Okay, sure. So you want to know where I...
No, yeah, you can start like what do you mean?
What I mean, so the stress illusion, I believe...
Yeah, maybe what do you mean by the stress illusion?
Okay. Awesome. I really believe that we are taught as a society, the way we're taught to deal with stress is flawed. And society's stress culture is just through the roof. People are going on stress leave, they're burning out. And from my perspective, if what we were being taught would work, there wouldn't be so many people who were stressed. And so if you think about how we're taught to deal with stress, we're supposed to exercise, we're supposed to breathe deeply, we're supposed to have time with friends, be optimistic, all of these different things, which is all really important for a healthy lifestyle. But if that was if exercising was the answer to not being stressed, then there wouldn't be so many people who are completely stressed at the gym. So
yeah,
I am on a mission to change the conversation. And it all began years ago when I was actually told, I was across from my neurologist at the hospital. And I have post-surgical neuropathic pain. And he said to me, he said, Allison, look, you're going to need to understand exactly what's happening here. Your pain is never going to go away. You are never going to be off pain medication again. You're never going to work full time again. And you need to reevaluate your expectations for your life. And I was like, it was a really tough conversation. And I left that hospital scared. I thought, oh my God, what if he's right? What if this is it? What if I only have 2 to 5 hours of functionality a day and I never get to work full time again? And so I went on this quest for myself to figure out, how do I run a business, keep going with my dreams and everything and my goals and what I want to do, and have neuropathic pain. And that quest led me to more frustration than answers. And that became the foundation. The work I created in order to get through my own challenges is what ultimately ended up creating the foundation of what is now I refer to the stress illusion and my approach to solving for stress.
That's awesome because I think a lot of people I've talked to have gone through crucible moments, and they been given these big lift. For me, I had cancer when at age 27, a level 3 sarcoma, and I was either I was going to survive or not survive. I'm 55, age 27, I survived it, but it made me think about the things I thought were impossible, because there were a lot of people telling me oh, you're not going to make it, or or you should have different priorities. And I started to change what I thought was possible. And pre-cancer me wouldn't be on the mic. I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't have been doing my music. I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't have gone. I lived in Japan pre-cancer. Keith, my first name. I would have never done those things. So sometimes something happens. It doesn't have to be as bad as cancer or what happens, but I think people get a wake up call and they have to figure out what they have to do. I think that seems like maybe common what you're talking about. I think people have experienced, and you have your own, means of identifying it as a stress illusion. I think I've actually experienced what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you're right. There is that moment, that impetus that takes us in a direction that says, I'm not going to take it anymore, and the way I'm doing things is no longer going to work. And what I love about what you shared is like you had this cancer diagnosis, which most people like, I mean, obviously that's a scary diagnosis. There's a lot of emotion that went around that, I'm sure. And we could probably spend an hour talking about and unpacking that experience. And the my dog's for now decided that he's going to hang out with us here for this call, but he'll be fine.
Oh, good.
Um, the what's interesting though is you saw the blessing in it. It changed how you showed up in your life, and I think that that's the defining moment that people have in their life. They have to decide, am I going to go in the direction that the doctor tells me to go? That like this is the end of my, what I thought my life was going to be, or am I going to choose another alternative path and to be resilient?
Yeah, because you can get all these limitations. I had people saying, "Well, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that." Like what immediately went and did when in the middle of my cancer, I was a mountain biker and I went and bought a frame. Every week I bought a component, and by the time I was done with my treatment, I had a brand new bike. There was like a downhill bike, and then the first thing I did once I was out of rehab, I started going to Vermont and doing the downhill. Now everybody told me, including my parents and everybody loved me, said, "Well, you shouldn't do that because you had cancer on your back, and you should be like, you shouldn't go out and go." If I said, "Why not?" Because like I want to live, I want to be able to get back in shape, and it was a choice I made. And there are people that will tell you like, "Oh, to be more careful." And maybe I was like the opposite. I ended up saying like, "Why should I be limited? I should just go and do what I think I want to do within reason." But I
Yeah.
did not feel like I had a ceiling. I had to feel like I needed to show that I didn't. And I could break through it.
Yeah, it's interesting, how it just shifts your perspective. And everybody seems to have an opinion about what we're supposed to do, right? Oh, don't work so hard. Oh, don't, like don't push yourself to do that big, marathon or the biking or whatever. And it's like, you know what? You get to make your own decision and decide what works for you. And so often we're held back by other people's opinions. And so that's a really great point to shift that and to choose your own path.
So, what is personal capacity design? Like, how do you define what does that mean? How does that impact your like mental
So,
health and happiness and stuff like that?
right. So, personal capacity, from my perspective, is how we allocate the limited resources we have each and every day to do, to think, to feel, and to be. And so often, when people will come to me and they're like, okay, I'm completely stressed out. I've got to get better organized. I've got to be more productive. And I'm like, well, that's going to cover off what you do, right? We can streamline what you do, and that's important. But what about what you think, what you feel, and how you are, the habits and your essence around it? And so, personal capacity design is a system I have where it's like we actually look at how are you investing those resources? What are you doing with them as a whole? And then we strategically start to look at, okay, well, maybe I don't need to do that, or maybe I'm feeling this, but I'm resisting how I'm feeling that. So I've got to process that so that it's taking away less of my capacity. And for every person, the journey is very different. I have one client who we did 6 months coaching together. And when we started, he was a numbers guy. So he's like, look, I estimate that I'm at 128% of my capacity, or 100, yeah, 128. And so basically, for what he wanted to do and how much work he was doing, like that he thought was appropriate for where he was at in his career and what he wanted, how he wanted to spend his life, he was maxing out plus way more. So that meant not sleeping right enough, not spending time with his wife, not spending time with his kids. And when we finished together at the end of 6 months, he's like, Allison, I've calculated and I'm only 38% capacity. And so we literally redesigned how he was spending his life, took away some of the angst, right, around the work, the worrying, the not making decisions fast enough, the, ruminating on problems, and we eliminated it. And then now it's like, okay, now you get your bliss list and we can redesign what you're putting into your days. And like to me, seeing a client transform like that, where he felt like he was completely suffocating, and now he's like, wow, I get to decide what I'm going to do, is like, that makes my heart sing. That's a pretty cool deal.
Yeah. But that seems like it opens up, like, a lot of things that affect your mental health, your happiness, and your overall career success. Because I think a lot of times, if you're too pessimistic and then you're too like tied to certain metrics, because I'm a, part of my life is I'm a software designer,
Okay.
and we've got tons of metrics, and we've got tons of things that we have to do. And then I do this music and I do the podcast. So I've got a bunch of things going on. But I'm a Buddhist, and what I do is I always like take time to meditate and chant, and I let things go. And so sometimes you
Mm.
have to let certain things go just to say, hey, you know, because a lot of when I was like in my 20s, a lot of us, early software guys, we just sit for like 6 hours straight trying to code something. And then we started realizing that you get diminishing returns, that the idea of just sitting there straight doing it doesn't actually give you valuable work. It actually is better if you do a couple hours and walk away, maybe go to the gym, maybe go for a walk, maybe go play your guitar, then come back and look at it. And it's like the elapsed time doesn't equal the quality of the work. That you have to get your mind to a place where you're not stressed out, or you're not going to do good work. So I think that kind of sounds like what you were talking about with your client.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting though, because like when you're in a maximum capacity or above and burning out, if you don't have the habit of exercise, adding exercise into your routine is going to feel like you can't do it. And so one of the illusions for me is with the system is that exercise is going to solve your stress problem. It's not. It's going to make you healthier. It's going to release hormones that have already fired and maybe made you stressed. But to me, that's not fixing it. That's reacting to the stress pattern. And so when you think about and this is like the irony of our lives, is there's so many people who spend 9 to 5 creating stress, feeling overwhelmed, feeling anxious, feeling disappointed with their work, right? And just getting agitated all day long. And then they have to transition before they go home to their family, and they go to the gym to release all that angst and that anger and those stress hormones. And then they go to the gym, but they have to do that not because it's the healthy choice, but because they don't want to be grumpy bear when they get home and bring their work into their home life. And so it's,
Mhm.
yes, like there's so many things we could unpack. Yes, you need to have breaks in the middle of the day, but what those breaks are different for every person. So some people work really well in a 20-minute block, and then they need 5 minutes to sort of recharge a bit. Other people like 75 minutes. Other people it's 45 minutes. And this is part of the designing capacity that is so important for each person. And for some people, meditation is absolutely will like change their world. For other people, it will cause absolute anxiety, and it doesn't work. It backfires. And so there's no blanket solution for
Yeah.
every one person.
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
everybody's so individual, but then there's a lot the problem with sometimes the workplace, they've got, like, set breaks, but those breaks don't really help certain people. Like, certain
Right.
people, like, having that set break doesn't actually because you've gotten into the root of the problem. A lot of times we've gotten into this world where industrialization and modernization has created, oh, everybody's the same, everybody gets the same thing. And then we find out really that there's a lot of individuality and everybody kind of needs a custom solution. But that
That's
doesn't
right.
work when
But there
people
are a
want
lot of people who
to say everybody fits in the same square peg in a hole. And so,
right, nobody's fitting. We don't fit. We need to get out. But what's interesting is I would say, let's say an office, everybody breaks at 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay, start at 8:30, 10 o'clock to 10:15, everybody's got a break. In that time between 8:30 and 10, there are people who are probably having times when they're getting distracted and they're getting those diminishing returns if they're not taking a break. So break doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to get up and, go have a drink or whatever. It could just literally mean I'm going to shift my gears on my brain to look at something over here. So no distractions, no notifications for 45 minutes, and then switching gears, looking at all the notifications, checking email, getting into a different vibe, maybe getting up. I stood all day and then I decided to sit down when I came back over to the computer for you. Like it's, figuring out how can you get some movement, how can you get your brain to disconnect so you can come back to the work you're doing and be more focused in the meantime. Yeah. And then take the break at 10 o'clock too. Why not? But you may need to manufacture some little breaks in between if you're in that kind of an environment.
yeah, I mean, also I was in an environment where I was a road warrior and I was on the plane, Sunday to Thursday, come home and then have to leave, Sunday, come back Thursday and keep on doing that. And then that caused a whole lot of stress. And then the whole thing with the pandemic is like it came down that you didn't really need to do that because I've been working like 2.5 years straight remote and I don't have to fly to the clients anymore because they like, oh, they don't want to pay for that anymore. And well, they found out they don't really need it for what we're doing. But the whole idea back then, and I did it in the 90s. I was a big road warrior, flying everywhere, and it was just a expectation that you had to be in that kind of rabbit on a wheel or hamster that to show, um, what your badge of honor that you're willing to kind of put yourself through it.
I was talking with someone about this today because both she's a colleague in the speaking industry. We make our living speaking at conferences, and I do a lot of virtual, so it's a mix, right? But getting on an airplane and going and speaking at a conference, like it's a lot of energy expenditure. And so it's a real blessing to be able to do that and to be hired to speak. And I love it. And she's like, you know what? I don't think I can do it. Like, I don't think I want to. This was her perspective. Is like that road warrior lifestyle is too much for her. Like I just don't want it anymore. So I'm going to focus mainly on virtual.
Mhm.
And I'm like, you know what? I like kind of half and half, right? Give me a few nights out on the road, not necessarily every week, but do the virtual to support the in between is a nice little thing. But COVID did open us up to that. Like there's no world in which some of the work I've done in the last 3 years would have happened virtually 5 years ago. Like it just wouldn't have. And now I've spoken to hundreds of people at one time right
Mhm.
here from this spot. And it's been just as good connection. And sure, we don't have the shaking hands and hugs and everything afterwards, but it's still quite powerful to work virtually. So I'm glad that we can do that.
It was like podcasting. I got into it in 2016, and since then I've done hundreds of shows with people around the world. That when I was a musician, I had to go to New York or go to Boston or go wherever I'm going or go to Japan, go to those places, and I started to do things where I was able to actually reach more people than I'd ever done physically. And then I'm like, wow, that's interesting. Not that I don't like doing the physical, it's cool. I mean, I'm a performer. There's nothing like a crowd, but
Right.
to be able to have the impact through the podcast is a different thing. And so that I've kind of embraced like a percentage of, we go when it's necessary for my music, you show up at a stage and do a show because that's how you reach the fans. And at music today, that's how we make money. We make more money if we actually show up because the
Oh, do
streaming,
you?
everybody knows about that
Okay.
with the writer strike. But the whole idea, yeah, yeah, we make more money. You
Yeah.
don't make money streaming. It's across the board.
Right. It's changed a lot, right? How the money is made, and I guess for me as an artist, so a spoken artist, in many ways as a speaker and an author, and uh, I I like the bulk of my money is made. You're right, when I'm in front of people, but I can do that virtually as well, and you do get paid more when you're in person, but you know sometimes the travel isn't worth it, right?
Yeah, I think it's just the whole idea of exhaustion, because the sense of exhaustion, I think that's the kind of like there's a comment in your list of questions you like to answer. So how
Oh, sure.
can leaders overcome the sense of exhaustion? And I think people felt like you had to be a road warrior, that you had to kind of put the 100 hours in. You got to go fly here, fly at a moment's notice, jump in the jet, go to the client site, work on the red eye, deal with the problem, deal with all the issues, and to show that you're totally devoted.
Right.
You just sit there. Like I was in Japan, and people would just stay in the capsule hotel instead of going back home. Tons of the salarymen that I worked with, they wouldn't leave. They lived outside of Tokyo, but they would stay in Tokyo all week in these capsule hotels just because they felt like they had to show dedication. And they wouldn't see their families. I was like, wow, that's pretty dedicated. But
So
as
I
I think
wonder.
there's a point where that stress, it does mess you up.
For sure. And so it's interesting because if you love that, so imagine there's somebody who's staying at the capsule because they're kind of an introvert and they really don't want to go home and they would prefer to just leave the kids and not have the hassle and focus on the work. And then they're totally present as a parent on the weekend. Well, then that works for them. But it doesn't sound like most people were doing that out of a really designed perspective. It was more out of obligation, more out of trying to keep up with the Joneses and appearances and all of those things. And that to me causes destructive stress. And I think it's important to talk about stress and how we define it
Yeah.
because it tends to be a bit of an interchangeable word in our world. So you can, anything can be called, oh, that's stressful. Oh, that's stressful. And I really challenge people to choose a better word because it may not actually be stressful. It might be hurtful. It might be fearful. It might be, many, many different circumstances or certain different adjectives depending on the circumstances and your perspective. Doesn't necessarily mean that everything is stressful because in my model, there are three kinds of stress. And by understanding these three kinds of stress, we can change our relationship with stress. So the first is recognizing that there is empowering stress. Good stress, in formal circles they would call it eustress, like as in eureka, and like euphoria and like a really good stress. I call it empowering. And these are the times when you're under pressure and it's like you're trying to hit a target, you are trying to make a deadline, you're working on some code and we're just like so into it, or you're in the flow state when you're creating a song or a poem or writing. Like for me, when I write an article and time goes by like that, that's actually good stress and motion. And we need that. We can vibe on that and it can drive us and make us feel really like in flow. So not all stress is bad. So there's that. And I believe we can design that into our days so we have more of it. Then there's the opposite side, the destructive stress, the stuff that makes us feel overwhelmed, anxious. It is like I have a whole metaphor about how that's created, but it's the stuff that is actually like when we hear doctors say, oh, you're under a lot of stress and it's bad for your health. It's not the empowering stress. That stuff's good. that lights you up. It's the destructive stress. And that, in my opinion, is self-manufactured. And so most models have this good versus negative stress. And my perspective is no, we actually have a third bucket. And I figured this out when I was in a situation where I was feeling really anxious, really stressed. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like what's wrong? Like I know all these strategies. Like I should feel better, right? And I was judging myself, which causes destructive stress, and going around in the loop. And I realized, oh, because we need to account for the third bucket of stress, and that is survival stress. Survival stress, it doesn't matter how good you are at all of the stress management techniques, at managing your storyline, at doing any of that stuff, if you're in danger or someone you love is in danger. You can't escape it. So when you start thinking about someone like you had your cancer diagnosis. Well, if you didn't feel some level or of intensity around anxiety and worry and oh my gosh, what's happening, and like feeling unsettled and unpeaceful when you've been diagnosed with cancer, then you would be a robot. Right? Like that's not how it works. So you can't escape that. But when we face situations that are survival stress related, so you or someone you love is in danger, then we can use the power of empowering stress to get all our work done, to go and flow, to sort of shrink the amount of time that it takes us to do things. And then we can be sure that we're not causing extra destructive stress, which makes survival stress harder than it needs to be.
Mm.
Can you see how that like would change how you perceive stress when you think of it in those three different buckets? And you're like, okay, I'm feeling survival stress. Oh, yeah, this sucks. It's awful. Well, yeah, but you got to feel it. You got to go
Yeah.
through it. You got to deal with it.
Well, that's like the life stress. Like there's certain life events you can't avoid. You can't avoid the things that you can't control. There are external environmental things that happen where internal, like the cancer, I couldn't control that. You know, I take my doctor's advice. That's how I controlled it.
Right.
I took the plan. I went and got multiple different options to figure out how to solve it. And I tried to think logically, but I mean, I was freaking out. I'm 27 years old. I was like, I don't expect to have a level 3. So I gave myself something to shoot for, like building a bike, like getting a new synthesizer, and then saying, instead of saying, "Well, I'm gonna die," you're like, "Hey, I'm gonna play that synthesizer. I'm gonna get to that bike." I gave myself a positive thing to work toward. So
Yeah.
I think what I tried to do, and even today, like as a musician, I write to kind of as a cathartic thing. A lot of
Mhm.
creative people, we take the things that stress us out and we turn them into art. Like
Yes.
most of the artists I talk to, they take things that were very deep to them, very affected them, and the negative or melancholy or angry or happy, whatever. Anything that affects you, whatever emotion it is, you can turn it into art. And being creative, I use that as a kind of cathartic stress reliever because it just takes that energy and flows it into something more positive. It becomes a piece of
Love
art.
it.
And then I use that in my day just to kind of even myself out. That's why, my recording studio is right behind me because I like being able to go to it whenever I want. So I don't have to give myself an excuse that I can't get to it.
Right. Which is really
It's
great.
just
And
there.
yeah,
So
look
I
at
can
Taylor
always get to
Swift.
it.
Taylor Swift has managed to like hone the angst to create art, right? And I think every one of us uses, if we're in touch with
Yeah,
our
she's got
emotions, we
that.
can
She got
use
that.
those
She just
to fuel, right? I think, did we lose signal? Yeah, no, we're good. There, you're back. You kind of cut out for a second, but I got you back.
Yeah, it's a little glitchy. Yeah. Yeah, and
All
she's
good.
amazing because she's going back and re-recording all of her albums, and she's that's a lot of work to go back and re-record all your albums just because monetarily she wants to own the masters. I mean, people wonder why she's doing that for there's a monetary reason, there's an artistic reason. She didn't have a good contract, so she has to redo 'em. And so, she takes the energy to do that and do a world tour. That's a lot. A lot of artists don't do the level of work she's doing. Guys,
Oh,
people like Prince did, but she's putting a lot of work in. But she does, she probably finds it cathartic, to do that because she's owned in her life. She's owned in her work.
right. And she's probably, well, we don't know. I don't know her, but you don't, but you can observe how she's in flow. So, like when she's in her art, like when she's performing and all of that. But like, think about our own days, right? Like, if we can find time when we're chasing a deadline that's reasonable, we've got a goal, like, I'm going to finish this project or I'm going to work on this thing. And we have accountability. So maybe it's a client or a friend who we say, hey, I'm going to get this to you. Come on over and listen to my new song or whatever it is tomorrow night. Then you're under the pressure to get it done. And you can manufacture that flow state into your days. So
Mhm.
it's one is like
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
been really
yeah,
helpful for me.
you can be, yeah. But sometimes, yeah, you can be your own worst enemy. You have to kind of, like you said, a lot of things you can self sabotage. You can create a lot of that stress by, having unrealistic expectations if you don't know yourself. You kind of got to get to a point. You look in the looking glass, being a poet. Victorians had this idea of looking glasses to kind of self reflect. And do you have goals that are reasonable that you can actually hit, or do you always put stuff in front of you that is so hard to hit that you create unnecessary stress?
Yeah.
Because I've seen people do that. I've seen people like go and say, I know who they are," and then they say they can do something, and I was like, "I know it takes him 3 weeks to do it, and he said he can do it in one. He's not going to hit it, and then he's going to get a lot of stress because like he's not going to hit it." And I
Well,
know
and
he's not gonna hit it, but he doesn't
that's
know that
exactly right.
for some reason, or he's overcommitting. I'm like,
Yeah, exactly. And it's how you take something that could be empowering stress and turn it into destructive stress. So we should talk about that model because the way I look at it is you have around everything you do, you have some sort of an emotion. And what happens is those emotions are often misplaced. Okay. So we'll unpack that in a second. And then you have around everything, you have thoughts and storyline that accompany everything you do. And those thoughts often default to negative. Okay. So that makes it harder to deal with if we're leaning negatively. And then you have that next layer, which is these barriers to performance or the habits that ultimately are unhelpful in helping you do the thing you want to do. And so those would be unrealistic expectations, not setting boundaries, saying yes when you wanted to say no, beating yourself up, having like unkind thoughts or being cruel to yourself. Long, long, long list of barriers that can be a part of it. And when you add those elements onto anything that you do, we make it harder than it needs to be. But another one of the illusions is that, like, if we take each one of those, uh, I'm gonna take and I'm gonna pick on something you said earlier. If I have permission to do that, may I? Can I push back on something? Because you said, well, you got to let it go.
yeah, yeah,
And it's
yeah,
interesting
yeah.
because I used to be told to let things go too. But when you're dealing with survival stress issues, you can't let it go because those are the very things that will often, the things that are outside of our control are the very things that we like are defined by. They're the things that light up our soul. They're the things that we are part of, like the biggest part of our human experience. And we're taught And, this is just how it is. Oh, ignore it. Let it go. You can't control it. Forget about it. And I'm like, that's called denial. So emotionally, it's really not helpful to just let something go. Not only, and then what happens is when we get into that, it's like people aren't processing the true emotion, and then they're trying to let it go, and they say, oh, I don't care about that, or I forgot about that, or I'm letting it go. And it's like, but you're really not, because it's actually inside of you. So my perspective is you got to process it. We have to be okay with with the hardest emotions, so that our bodies, our minds, our souls can feel it and allow it, to give it the space to fuel, like to be in motion and to be released. So instead of let it go, process. So that emotion, because I think what's happening a lot in this society right now, and I've seen it and I've been guilty of it, and as well, is, let's say we're really afraid about money or a cancer diagnosis or something that is survival stress related. So related to your danger, and you have something legitimate that you're feeling very fired up about. Okay. And then you get into onto the highway, or you're pulling into the drugstore, and somebody cuts you off, and it turns into a big road rage incident. Well, you're probably not you. I mean, individuals like out there are probably not that upset about the person who just cut them off. Like, okay, well, they're a bad driver and they didn't see you. And on any good day, you might just go, okay, whatever, and forget about it. But because you're in that hyper fearful state of whatever the survival stress issue is, you react, you push. And then it becomes, you create a problem where they didn't need to be a problem, all because you weren't waking up in that day, and whenever you start to get upset about something that's a big deal in your life, and actually going, wow, I'm really upset about that, and feeling it and processing it and going into it, which allows you to not actually take it out on unsuspecting innocence.
Yeah, so there you don't let go the impetus to that incident. You have to kind of go into it. I think as a creative person, when we write music, a lot of the artists I talk to, we take those moments that were making us feel anxious or angry, and we try to process it
Right.
into the art form. So I probably like, you know, you let it go is more like you're gonna have an argument and it doesn't
Mhm.
make sense to do it, that you back off. It may kind of let go that I was kind of referring to, but
Yeah.
like if you have a thing that you need to address, you should probably address it. But like something that is an inane argument that I don't really need to get into, I could like let that go. Being like a Buddhist, kind of let that go and like kind of like roll off. It kind of from a Buddhist perspective is that maybe
Be like
the
water.
thing I was trying to get to. But
Yeah. Well, but even there, I would look at that and say, okay, and like,
yeah,
who am
that
I
kind
to
of
argue
idea.
with the Buddhist philosophy? I get it. I just, I would say, if something is causing you angst and you want to fight about it, I don't necessarily think you need to, especially what it is, but I'd be really curious what the thing is that's triggering. Like, what is the thing that is giving you the cue that you're getting angry? And I'm like, let's lean into that, be aware of that so that you can process that thing, or recognize, are you having an unrealistic expectation? One of my clients, she's, her and her husband are going through different things. And I'm like, okay, so you're constantly irritated and getting angry and responding in a way that you're not happy with. And we're trying to shift that. So what is the expectation that's happening around all of those moments that you're firing in a way that you're not happy with? And it's like, okay, we'll just let it all go. But yeah, but there are actually things that are bothering her. And so it's like when we were able to unpack the things that were bothering her, now she's free. Now she's free because she's no longer recreating the same thing and trying to push it down or forget
Mhm.
about it because it was constantly in her face. Yeah. It's a
Yeah,
different way to look
that's
at
the
things.
kind of thing like you want to unpack and kind of through a therapeutic kind of session or through like dealing with a counselor is that not that you're going to stomp down those things. You let it go through, but maybe in the right place.
Yeah.
Like not that you're never going to address it, but address it at the right time in the right place instead of the wrong time in the wrong place.
Right. Yeah. Well, and this is the thing, the misplacing of the emotion is what gets us into trouble. So if you're angry about this thing and you get into this little thing over here that really isn't related, but you take out your anger and your emotion and the intensity over here, that's what ends up causing a lot of the destructive stress, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, I think we see that people are so out of sorts that you get these hair trigger events that you're like, why is this person acting like this? They just out of nowhere they're just going off the handle. You
right,
hear about it on airplanes, you see it at restaurants, people just going like that's not appropriate, but there's this buildup that they're not addressing, and then it just happens. Not that it
right,
just happened, but it happened because of a reason. There's probably a whole bunch of stages that they went through that you didn't see, and now you're seeing it. So it's not out of nowhere. It's coming out of somewhere. Um,
that's right. And I believe that it's coming out of a place of not processing emotion effectively when it happens. So there's probably, and in some of those cases, obviously there's mental illness situations, right? And some of them are legit, like, they've been wrong and maybe that's just the anger of that moment. But many of those situations are exactly what you're saying, I think, is basically we're seeing the product of potentially days, weeks, months, even years of not effectively processing emotion in a way that allows it to dissipate and be healthy emotion. Like we need every emotion. Like I used to think we had to be happy every day and it like all the time. And if I wasn't happy, I was failing in life. Well, that's not how it works. Right? Happy is one emotion, but we only know happiness because we know sadness. We only understand what joy feels like because we understand despair. We need the opposing views in order to actually understand and feel the fullness of the human experience. And so often we're taught like push it down, push it down, push it down. Don't cry, don't cry. Well, okay, but that's a natural reaction. We need to cry. So I think it's years
yeah,
of
I mean, I think
pushing down,
artists
pushing down.
sometimes we
Go ahead.
well, a lot of times as artists, like if you'll find a lot of artists will say, if I'm happy, I do my worst work. Like a
Yeah,
lot of famous musicians and singer-songwriters, like James Taylor, there's a story. Like when he was doing Fire and Rain, he's going through a lot. He had addiction problems, all kinds of problems. Some of his greatest music was when he wasn't personally in a good place. Then when he got married and was happy, he did a record, and then the critics panned it. He was actually happy for the first time in his life. There was a documentary, and he was saying, "I was very happy." But then my work, people are used to my work reflecting this kind of sadness or despair or what he was able to convey. And then they didn't like when he was happy. And then he had to
right.
deal with that as an artist. Well, how do I deal with that?
I remember watching, I think it was an interview or was it reading an article about Carrie Underwood. Okay, Carrie Underwood. So when she got married and had a kid and everything, she got really happy. Exactly what you're talking about. And all of her songs were this like, breakup and everything. And then she became very in love, and it was you could see the tone change, like to your point, right? And she found that when she did so Two Black Cadillacs was a story about somebody else who was having angst. I use the word angst a lot. I love it. I think it's a fun word, but it feels awful. But she would tell stories about bad stuff to create that electricity in the anyway. So that was just that one phase in her career that I'd watched. Was
Mhm.
it watched or I think I watched it anyway. But to your point, it's like imagine though people who aren't artists, how do they unpack this? How do they unpack the emotion? Because like I can do it by writing, like that's my creative outlet, or coaching people or being on a podcast or whatever. Like that's my way. You do it through your music, like recording ideas and things. But how do people do it when they don't have it? They don't have that creative outlet, and so many people have shut off their creative outlet as part of their, getting into the grind of life. They don't have time to do the creativity. And so, I mean, that's a problem. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing such a influx of really, really tough
Yeah, a
things.
lot of people feel like it's like being an adult. What I found is a lot of people feel that it's like the inner child or it's childish to go for that artistic type of mindset because they're taught, because of their parents or their grandparents or they're given these truths that are or their beliefs, but they think they're truths. So that's like silly. It's silly to think that you should write a song. It's silly to paint or be an artist. That you got to do something more productive, and that's all foo foo. You can't do that. That's not. So people kind of repress those outlets, and they don't think it's actually appropriate. And so it gives
And
them
then
no outlet because they're
that's right.
also given like a dogma or control. They have where do they go? Because they have nothing. you know.
Well, and they're, often like if they're climbing the corporate ladder or they're in a job that is like a grind where they've got to like perform all the time and they don't have that creative outlet or they don't have something in order to effectively process. What ends up happening is like most of my clients come to me at a point in their life where they're like, I feel like I'm suffocating and I'm not willing to spend the next decade of my life the same way the last 3 decades of my life have been spent. And some of them will ask them, one of the exercises I do with my clients, and I'll encourage your
Yeah.
listeners
So,
to do this as well, is to create a bliss list. So if you had an extra hour today, what would you actually do with your time that would light your soul on fire? And most people can't answer the question. And maybe they can give me one example or whatever, but I end up having my clients like write out as many possible minimum of 20 ideas of things they can do if they had 15 extra minutes, an hour, a day, a weekend, a week, whatever, so that they could actually know what to do that's going to give them an outlet that doesn't work if they want to not work. I would work all the time because I love it. But like this is work for me, so it's pretty hard to call it work. But you know, I I think most people do not know and do not remember what gives them that outlet. And then they got to spend their, late 40s, early 50s, 60s
yeah.
finding it again.
It's like, people don't feel like for mental health compared to like your medical, physical, people don't actually take care of it in the way that they should. They don't think of it as real when they should because it's all mind, body, heart, soul. It's all part. It's not just like your mind. It's not just your body, it's your heart and your soul. It's all of it. Right. So if you
Oh,
have any part of that leg of like that whole structure and you don't take care of it, you're going to end up hitting the wall. At some point, you're going to hit the wall. So, and if people don't, some people, because of certain belief systems, they don't believe that there's anything that's real about that one part of that not feeling right or not being at its optimum, position because you're not taking care of it. And so then you'll finally, end up having to go to a therapist or a doctor or, a life coach because you hit that wall and you finally hit it and you're like, "Oh, there is something wrong."
It's interesting because there was an article that I read today, and it was in Medium, and it's on my LinkedIn. So if people want to go to my LinkedIn, you're welcome to come and find me there and connect and say where you heard me and all of that. But anyway, so I wrote about it, and it was by an entrepreneur who he's like, I've seen burnout, I've experienced burnout, because I shared it over on LinkedIn, and it actually changes people's personality. And I was like, oh, yes, it does. It does. And the issue is people are so caught up. When people are stressed and they're suffocating and they're not able to deal with it, they often don't even have the space to realize that they're in the weeds of it, and therefore they need to come out of it. And that's one of the biggest issues, because it's like, and especially the more successful you are, the more I start hearing things like, oh, it's just the price of success. No, it doesn't need to be. Or it's just the way life goes, right? No, that's not how it needs to be. Like, it may have been your reality so far, but you can pull out of it. You can change how you're interpreting everything that's happening around you so that you're not feeling this overwhelming sense of stress. Totally possible.
I think a lot of people don't realize I think a lot of people don't realize how much control they have, right?
Mhm.
Because they've kind of set up these paradigms. They've set up these, I've said like pre-cancer, I had these glass ceilings that I kind of just broke through, and because I had this mindset, and then I was like, oh, that wasn't really, I was self-limiting, and like, why was I doing that? Because I didn't even think that was possible. So there's a lot of people that create their own hell. It's in poetry, it's in philosophy. There's all kinds of ideas. Like you totally can create that environment. It doesn't have to be anything external. You
Right.
you can create that problem, and then like you can solve that problem. But if you never were taught, if you got a belief that you think is the truth that tells you can't change it, like you've got to go to the core of that and figure out the foundation. And it's like, well, you got to challenge it.
Right. And you have to look at your life and your patterns objectively, because most people are like, oh, it's about what's happening around me. The issue, but actually, two people can experience the exact same situation and have a completely different stress reaction to it. To one person, it's like, okay, yeah, whatever, we've got to deal with it. And to the other person, it's like the whole world is caving in. And the best example of this is an airport. Because since the beginning of air transport, right? Air travel, there have been weather delays, mechanical problems, long lineups, lost luggage. That's just how travel works. You're a road warrior, you know that. And so I'm constantly just mesmerized by the dramatic response to the repeating reality of air travel by travelers. It's like I just sit back. I mean, I need
Yeah.
popcorn sometimes in those hallways. I'm like, bring it on. Watch this happen. Oh, that's about to transpire. And
Yeah,
it's like,
you
but it's
didn't
not
expect that.
shocking. Like, you could have booked a different flight
Yeah.
or made like, you know what I mean? Like, if you were that, I remember once there was a guy who was going to a
Yep.
meeting, and we were both flying to Montreal from London, and it was like, yeah, he's like, oh yeah, when I get there, I've got about 30 minutes to get from the airport to the hotel. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't, like, first of all, it's a 45-minute drive. And he's like, oh yeah, but I didn't want to go earlier. And then the plane was delayed. So it was like he was just angrier and angrier and angrier. I'm like, there were 3 other flights today, and you could have taken any one
Yeah,
of them.
he's gonna
And
hit.
right. And it's just, but this is the thing. And like, think about another
Yeah,
example is moving,
yeah,
right? Some people, it's a 4-month absolutely stressful situation, and other people, they pack up and off they go. Like, it's not about the circumstances that are happening around you. It's not about your health diagnosis. It's about your pattern and how you respond to those things that are happening. That's the issue. And that
Yeah.
I think is another illusion. I don't
Yeah.
think we have full control about our response. I actually believe we have very little control about our response until we decide to get objective about it, observe it, and create steps to change it. Because most of it is on default, and we're just going to repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat until we
Yeah.
actually interrupt the pattern.
Especially if you got that fight or flight hormone triggering, like, because hunter gatherer kind of situation, we getting triggered by, those hormones, the fight or flight for things that aren't the wolf. It's not the
Right.
saber tooth tiger, but it feels like your body is acting like it is, you know. And so
Right.
then people are like, well, it's mental. But yeah, well, things are mental. That's what goes back to the mind, body, soul, spirit. As Buddhists, we believe that a lot of intangible things have a lot of power. That some people might think that only the physical things have power, and the spiritual things have power. But some people don't believe that, and so they get caught up in their kind of belief systems that they can't get out of, and so they're stuck on a path until you actually challenge it. You're going to be on that path. You're going to be doing the same thing over and over and over again until you actually stop to say, why am I doing that? I keep on getting the same result. Did I think I was going to get something else?
Yeah, definition of an insanity, right? And it's interesting because I always imagine people running around office buildings as if bears are chasing them and wolves are chasing the bears, right? Like, I mean, that's the level of stress response people are having to a to-do list. Like, think about that. I got so much work to do. And then they're like totally overwhelmed and stressed. And it's like, yeah, that's not a bear. That's actually not you in danger. Now, if you consistently do not get your work done, maybe your danger is that you're going to lose your job or lose your client. And but even then, that's just an obstacle that we got to overcome. But like, if you're so caught up and on autopilot and repeating these patterns and not coming out of it, like, that is on you. But here's the thing, going back to the, can we actually control our response? I think so often we've had these repeating patterns ingrained for decades. Like, how you respond from the stress pattern is probably happening over and over and over and over and over again. And one of the challenges I see is that when people do step back and they say, I'm going to make a change, their instinct, to your point about fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which is, if you look at all of the 4 F's around that, the hormonal response around like true danger, survival stress. The thing is it's not like interrupting in that second and choosing a new path is really hard, and it's going to take a very long time. And so what I am trying to get people
Mhm.
to do is, like, let's say you're a worrier and that's your habit, that's your barrier to performance. And so everything, whether it's survival stress or just like a normal thing that needs to happen, which is an obstacle, you worry about it. And you're like, I'm never going to worry again. And I'm like, bull sugar, you are going to worry again. It's going to happen. And so instead of worrying about something for 3 weeks, can we worry about it for 2? Can we worry about it for 1 week? Can we get it down to 3 days, 2 days, 1 day, 1 hour, 10 minutes, and then 1 minute? We can turn it off. One of the principles in my book, Take Back Your Weekend, around problem solving is the second response is the priority. Get to it ASAP. Because if you're like, I'm never going to worry about again,
Mhm.
and then you worry, and then you go, oh, look at me, I'm worrying. I guess it's inevitable. I'm always going to be a worrier. Well, okay, that's fine, but can we interrupt it and then call that success? As opposed to just throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying, screw it, yeah, that's it, I'm always going to be a warrior. So, not judging yourself, another layer of destructive stress, is for falling into old patterns is really, really critical to full growth. Like we have to allow ourselves
Mhm.
to make the mistake and correct the mistake and celebrate the correction, not the elimination of the habit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, part of life is you're never gonna be perfect. Part of what we do as artists is, like, imperfections actually make our art, but there's this kind of modern concept that you should try to make it perfect because we have all these computers, and I think it kinda destroys the kinda nature of music. I'm a big purveyor of using older tools that are less perfect, that
Mm.
actually make the sound better because you allow micro timing errors and tonal changes that some people was like, "Oh, we got to clean it up and make it anesthetic." And I'm like, well, "That's not the way life is. Life, like a lot of art, is because it's moment in time. It's like stream of consciousness, and it's that moment that you capture, and that's what's pretty. That's what's beautiful. But if you overanalyze it with your with your brain, logical side of your brain, you kind of ruin it. So you have to learn to let go in that way of this mindset of trying to make it perfect and letting your kind of artistic mindset of like let it flow. So in that mindset, you don't overanalyze, oh, I hit the wrong note, I hit in the wrong key, I did this. No, just let it go and actually try to make something beautiful by not overanalyzing. So I mean it's kind of counterintuitive, but it it's a little bit what you said and a little bit not what you said
Yeah, no, it's great.
when it comes to
And
art. But
it's true because you do, like there are so many pieces in there, right? Like the overanalyzing is going to cause destructive stress, but the not analyzing is going to keep you stuck in patterns, right? And when it comes to art, I like those who perform live, they know. Like there's always, I used to say, I forget where I first heard it, but this is like when I used to be so afraid of public speaking. Like the fact that I earn my living now speaking at conferences and like for companies is shocking. Like I was not good. But anyway, there was always the speech I was going to give, the one I actually gave, and then the one I obsessed about on the way home to the steering wheel,
mhm,
right? The one I gave to the speech I gave to the steering wheel on the way home. And then there was the obsession for weeks gone by, like afterwards, going, oh my God, why did I say that? Why did I say that? And now I've gotten to a point where, like, even in this podcast, I've said things, and it's like there's a bit of a delay on StreamYard, right? So sometimes I'm like, okay, well, and like there are a million different ways I could have done better, right? I'm sure, but I won't even bother thinking about that because it's like, how are
mhm,
you in the moment? When you go and you do a show and you serve that audience in the way that you serve them, that's what needed to happen in that moment. There's not one person who's sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe they, missed that note or didn't play that song or they put it in that order when the set list was supposed to be like that." Like nobody's thinking that. They're in their own heads. And so as artists, and creators, and we can just beat ourselves up for what we did instead of just being and sinking so much into the
mhm.
moment that you don't even have to analyze that after. Sure, you always want to get better. And, if you can look at it from a curiosity lens instead of a
Yeah,
judgment,
but
how
it's
can
like
you
a
go
real
better?
freedom. It's a sense of freedom when you don't. It's a sense of freedom as you get older, or maybe it depends on where you are in your head. You could be younger and have this mindset. I've run into young artists that are totally kind of free, don't seem to be overthinking or worrying about it. And I've run into older artists that had the same mindset. So it didn't really matter the age, it's just where they
Yeah.
got to. They got to a point where they kind of like in the flow. You're either in the flow or you're not in the flow. Like it depends on where your head's at. You could be any age to be in it. It just depends on how you got there. But we actually did hit our hour mark, and
Oh,
I want people to know that we have that AllisonGraham.com/ghost link. And so if people click that link, what would they get? What does that
They
bring
can
them
sign
to?
up for my lift up. So every week I send out an email that's going to give you some insights, and I think it'll send you, let me know. We've mentioned a few things. We've got the barriers to performance. I've got a worksheet for that. So if that's helpful in any way, let me know. I'm happy to send you that for free. And of course, when you're on the list, you're part of the lift up community, and you get all the good stuff. All the good stuff. First dibs on different things, and I'll probably put this podcast out on it too because it went live, so I couldn't really. We're gonna have it up on YouTube, aren't you? You're gonna have it on all the different like Stitcher or Stitcher anymore.
Yeah, you're gonna have one thing. Yeah, what we do is we create give you a landing page that has like all the major places that it is, so the artist can go or your audience can go and watch or listen however they want to. So it's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, it's on Twitch, it's on Apple, it's on Amazon, it's on multiple platforms. So by tomorrow, you'll get a landing page and you can give that to your audience and they can go wherever they want to. On
Fantastic.
the landing page will be however they like to watch or listen to podcasts. We do that a value added thing by giving you that. But
Awesome.
tonight we will give you the Facebook and YouTube permanent links directly after the show, and you can give people those who want to watch that right now. But the landing page gives people more options. But yeah, thank you again for being on the show. It's been great,
That was great
very
conversation.
enlightening.
Thank you.
Very, I love to have people that say things I didn't know about or didn't understand in the way that you made me understand it. And that's the point of talking to people.
Yeah.
And so
Well, and you've
that's
done so
why
many
I do the
episodes.
podcast. So thank you again for being on the show.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Have a great night.